The autumn wind cut through the Rocky Mountains like a blade, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant snow. Harper Lane pressed her gloved hands against the steering wheel of her pickup truck, navigating the winding dirt road that led deeper into Echo Ridge. The mountains loomed around her, their peaks already dusted with early November snow, casting long shadows across the valley below. Harper was a field historian for the National Archives, specializing in military records from the Korean War era. At 32, she had spent the better part of a decade tracking down forgotten stories, interviewing veterans, and piecing together the gaps in America's military history. But nothing had prepared her for the call she'd received 3 days ago from a salvage dealer in Boulder, Colorado. "Found something you might want to see," the dealer had said, his voice crackling through her phone. "Old military journal, dated 1953, says something about Echo Ridge." Echo Ridge. The name alone sent a chill down Harper's spine. Every military historian knew the legend, an elite reconnaissance unit that had vanished without a trace during the final months of the Korean War. 23 men gone in a single night. Search parties had combed these mountains for weeks, finding only abandoned equipment and a line of combat boots arranged in perfect formation at the edge of a cliff. No bodies, no explanations, just questions that had haunted military archives for 70 years. The journal now sat in a waterproof case on her passenger seat. Harper had examined it carefully at the dealer's shop, her hands trembling as she turned the weathered pages. The handwriting was precise, methodical, the work of someone trained to document everything. The name inscribed on the inside cover read, "Captain Mason Graves, Echo Platoon, 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team." The entries were detailed, chronicling the platoon's final training exercises in these very mountains before their deployment to Korea. But it was the last entry that had driven Harper to make this journey into the wilderness. Dated November 8, 1953, just days before the platoon disappeared, it contained coordinates, hand-drawn maps of the ridge system, and a single phrase that had been underlined 3 times. "We didn't quit. We just vanished." Harper pulled into a small clearing where the road ended, killed the engine, and sat in silence for a moment. The wind whistled through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a raven called out. She grabbed her backpack, the journal case, and her satellite phone — cell service was non-existent out here — and stepped out into the cold mountain air. The coordinates from the journal led to a location approximately 3 miles northeast, deeper into the restricted area of the National Forest. Harper had obtained special permits for her research, but she knew she was pushing into territory that few people had visited in decades. The terrain was unforgiving, the weather unpredictable, and the isolation absolute. She began her hike, following an old game trail that wound through dense stands of aspen and lodgepole pine. The altitude made her breathing labored, and she paused frequently to consult her GPS and the hand-drawn maps from the journal. Captain Graves had been meticulous in his documentation, noting landmarks, elevation changes, and potential hazards. It was as if he had wanted someone to follow this path, to find whatever he had left behind. 2 hours into her trek, Harper reached a narrow ridge overlooking a steep valley. The view was breathtaking. Endless mountains stretching toward the horizon, their slopes painted in shades of gold and crimson by the autumn foliage. But Harper's attention was fixed on something else. Below her, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, she could see the remnants of what looked like an old military camp. Her heart raced as she carefully descended the slope, using exposed roots and rocks for handholds. The camp was more intact than she had expected. There were the rotted remains of canvas tents, rusted metal stakes, and scattered equipment covered in decades of pine needles and moss. But what caught her eye was a structure carved into the rock face itself, a small cave entrance, partially concealed by a carefully constructed rock wall that had weathered but not collapsed. Harper approached cautiously, her historian's instincts warring with a growing sense of unease. She pulled out her flashlight and examined the entrance. The rocks had been placed deliberately, forming a seal that could be removed. With effort, she began pulling away stones, her breath coming in short gasps from both exertion and anticipation. Behind the wall, the cave opened into a larger chamber. Harper stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air was dry and cold, preserved by the mountain's natural refrigeration. And there, arranged with military precision, were supply crates, equipment boxes, and a series of metal footlockers. She moved deeper into the cave, her light revealing more details. On the far wall, someone had carved a list of names, all 23 members of Echo Platoon. Next to each name was a date, November 12th, 1953, the day they disappeared. Harper's hands shook as she opened the nearest footlocker. Inside were personal effects, letters from home, photographs, dog tags, but there was also something else, a sealed metal canister marked "Classified" in faded red letters. She carefully extracted it, her mind racing with possibilities. Before she could examine it further, a sound outside the cave made her freeze. Footsteps. Someone was approaching. "I wouldn't open that if I were you," a male voice said from the cave entrance. Harper spun around, her flashlight catching the silhouette of a man in his early 50s, wearing a weathered field jacket and carrying a hiking pack. His face was lined and weathered, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Who are you?" Harper demanded, her hand instinctively moving to the pepper spray on her belt. "Connor Blake," the man said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm guessing you're the historian who got permits to explore this area. I've been waiting for someone like you to show up." "How did you know I'd be here?" Connor stepped into the cave, and in the better light, Harper could see the resemblance in his features to one of the photographs she'd seen in the footlocker. "Because my grandfather was Captain Mason Graves," he said quietly, "and I've been trying to find out what happened to him my entire life." The small diner in Pine Creek, the nearest town to Echo Ridge, smelled of coffee and bacon grease. Harper sat across from Connor Blake in a worn vinyl booth, the recovered journal and the sealed canister between them on the table. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street of the mountain town, population 847. Connor wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, his eyes fixed on his grandfather's journal. "I was 3 years old when he disappeared," he said. "Too young to remember him, but old enough that his absence shaped my entire childhood. My grandmother never remarried. She spent 40 years waiting for answers that never came." Harper studied him carefully. Connor Blake was a retired Army Ranger, he'd told her during their hike back to town. He'd followed in his grandfather's footsteps, serving in Iraq and Afghanistan before retiring on medical discharge after a roadside bomb nearly killed him in 2008. For the past 15 years, he'd been living in Pine Creek, working as a wilderness guide and privately investigating his grandfather's disappearance. "The official story never made sense," Connor continued. "Echo Platoon was training here before deploying to Korea. They were the best of the best. Survival experts, navigation specialists, elite soldiers. Then one night, they're just gone. No distress calls, no signs of struggle, nothing but those boots lined up at the cliff edge." "Like they walked away on purpose," Harper said. "Exactly. But that's impossible. These were career soldiers, patriots. They wouldn't desert, especially not all 23 of them at once." Connor opened the journal carefully, turning to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "My grandfather was meticulous. He documented everything. But look at this." Harper leaned in. The entry was dated November 10th, 1953, 2 days before the disappearance. The handwriting was different, more hurried, less precise than the earlier entries. "Training exercises suspended. Colonel Briggs arrived with new orders. Classification level increased. Team briefed on Operation Silent Echo. Cannot record details per security protocols. But something feels wrong. The men sense it too. Logan and Tyler have questions I can't answer. We ship out at 0400 on the 12th. Different destination than previously briefed. Ridge operations only. God help us if this goes wrong. Operation Silent Echo, Harper repeated. I've never seen that designation in any military records from that period. Because it doesn't exist, Connor said. At least not in any declassified documents. I've spent years filing Freedom of Information Act requests, searching archives, interviewing veterans from that era. It's like Operation Silent Echo was erased from history. Harper pulled out her laptop and opened her research files. The Korean War armistice was signed in July 1953. By November, combat operations had officially ended. What kind of mission would require an elite unit in the Colorado mountains after the war was over? That's the question I've been asking for 15 years, Connor said. He reached into his pack and pulled out a worn folder. But I haven't been idle. Look at this. He spread out a collection of documents, newspaper clippings, military discharge papers, and handwritten notes. After Echo Platoon disappeared, there was a massive search effort. 300 personnel, dogs, helicopters. This was 1953, so no satellite imagery. But they used everything they had. Found nothing except that camp you discovered and the boots. The case was closed after 6 weeks, listed as presumed killed in training accident, bodies unrecovered. But, Harper prompted, but several members of the search team died under suspicious circumstances in the following years. Car accidents, hunting mishaps, one suicide, and the commanding officer who ordered the closure of the investigation, Colonel Hunter Briggs, he retired immediately afterward and moved to Argentina. Died there in 1969, never gave a single interview about Echo Platoon. Harper felt the familiar thrill of a historian uncovering something significant. What about the other personnel, the support staff, the people who would have known about this operation? Connor smiled grimly. That's where it gets interesting. I tracked down a former Army clerk named Ethan Ward. He's 89 now, lives in a nursing home in Denver. 3 years ago, I finally convinced him to talk to me. He was terrified, even after all this time. What did he tell you? He said Echo Platoon was being used for something called a continuity protocol. He didn't know the details, but he saw requisition orders for specialized equipment, communications gear, surveying equipment, construction materials, enough supplies for 23 men to survive in the wilderness for months, maybe years. Harper's mind raced through the implications. Are you suggesting they went underground, literally? Look at what you found today. That cave was prepared, supplied, sealed. And that canister... Connor gestured to the classified container on the table. I'm willing to bet it contains orders or documentation that explains everything. We need to open it properly, Harper said. With witnesses, documentation, proper protocols. If this contains classified information, we could be breaking federal law. After 70 years, most classifications expire, Connor countered. And besides, don't you want to know the truth? Before Harper could respond, the diner door opened and a woman in her late 40s entered. She was dressed in practical outdoor gear, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her eyes scanned the room before settling on Harper and Connor's booth. She walked directly to their table. Dr. Harper Lane? The woman asked. Yes. Who are you? Riley Quinn. I'm a journalist with the Rocky Mountain Investigator. I've been researching the Echo Ridge disappearance for a documentary series. She glanced at the journal and canister on the table. And it looks like you found something significant. Connor moved to cover the items, but Riley held up her hand. Relax. I'm not here to steal your story. I'm here because someone needs to know what you've discovered. What do you mean? Harper asked. Riley slid into the booth next to Connor, lowering her voice. 2 weeks ago, a group of private contractors started surveying Echo Ridge. They have permits from the Forest Service for geological assessment, but I've been tracking their movements. They're using ground-penetrating radar, bringing in excavation equipment. They're looking for something, and I think it's connected to your missing platoon. Harper and Connor exchanged glances. Who are these contractors? Harper asked. Company called Sentinel Resource Management. On paper, they do environmental surveys and land assessment. But dig deeper, and you find connections to defense contractors and private intelligence firms. Riley pulled out her phone and showed them photographs of equipment and personnel at various locations around Echo Ridge. They've been very careful, very quiet, but they're definitely searching for something. The same thing we're searching for, Connor said quietly. Exactly, which is why I think we need to work together. Riley looked at each of them. You have historical expertise and family connection. I have investigative resources and media reach. If we pool our knowledge, we might actually figure out what happened to Echo Platoon before Sentinel finds it first. Harper considered this. The historian in her wanted to proceed through proper channels, file reports, work within the system. But another part of her recognized that something unusual was happening, something that might disappear into classified files if handled conventionally. What do you know about Operation Silent Echo? She asked Riley. The journalist's eyes widened slightly. So you found the name. That's further than I've gotten. All I know is that several Cold War-era military operations used the silent designation for projects related to continuity of government protocols. These were contingency plans in case of nuclear war, hidden command centers, supply caches, communication networks. In 1953, Connor asked, the Korean War was ending. The Cold War was just beginning. Exactly when those protocols were being developed, Riley said. Think about it. The Soviet Union had tested their first atomic bomb in 1949. The arms race was accelerating. The government was terrified of nuclear attack. They were building bunkers, establishing continuity plans, preparing for the worst. Harper's hands went to the journal, flipping through pages she'd already read. Captain Graves mentioned Ridge operations. What if Echo Platoon wasn't training for Korea at all? What if they were building something here? A bunker, a cache, some kind of continuity facility? Then the question becomes, Connor said slowly, why did they disappear after building it? And why has it remained hidden for 70 years? Riley leaned forward. And why is Sentinel looking for it now? The three of them sat in silence, the weight of the mystery pressing down on them. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting Echo Ridge in shades of amber and shadow. Somewhere in those peaks, Harper thought, lay the answers. The question was whether they could find them before someone else did. We need to open that canister, Harper said finally, but we need to do it right. Document everything, have witnesses, create a record that can't be disputed. I can help with that, Riley said. I have recording equipment, and I can bring in a locksmith who specializes in vintage military hardware. We can do this properly. Connor nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning, we meet at my cabin. It's isolated enough that we won't be disturbed, but close enough to town if we need help. Agreed, Harper said. But we need to be prepared for whatever we find. This could change everything we know about Cold War history. Or it could be nothing, Connor said, though his voice suggested he didn't believe that. Either way, Riley added, we document everything. The truth deserves to be told. As they prepared to leave the diner, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a threshold. 70 years of silence were about to end, and she had no idea what that would mean for any of them. Connor Blake's cabin sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by towering pines and overlooking a small mountain lake. The structure was modest but well-maintained, a single-story log building with a covered porch and a stone chimney from which smoke now rose in thin gray wisps against the morning sky. Harper arrived first, just after dawn. The November cold bit at her cheeks as she climbed out of her truck, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Connor was already outside, splitting firewood with practiced efficiency. He nodded at her approach. Coffee's ready inside. Riley should be here within the hour with her equipment and the locksmith. Inside, the cabin was warm and smelled of pine and wood smoke. The main room served as both living space and office, with one wall covered in maps, photographs, and documents related to Echo Platoon. Harper recognized some of the images from military archives, but others were clearly Connor's own research. Hand-drawn timelines, family photographs, notes written in tight, precise handwriting that reminded her of his grandfather's journal. "You've dedicated your life to this," Harper observed, studying the wall. Connor poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. "After I got out of the Army, I needed a purpose. Finding out what happened to my grandfather gave me that." He gestured to the wall. "Every face up there represents someone's son, brother, father. 23 men who deserved better than to be forgotten." Harper moved closer to a photograph of Echo Platoon taken during their training at Fort Bragg. 23 young men in military uniforms standing in formation. They looked confident, capable, ready for anything. Captain Mason Graves stood front and center, his expression serious but not grim. Next to him was a younger soldier with a wide grin. The name beneath read Corporal Logan Reed. "They were so young," Harper said softly. Graves was 31, the oldest. Most of the others were in their early 20s. Reed was 22. Tyler Shaw was 24. They had their whole lives ahead of them. Connor's voice was thick with emotion. And then they were just gone. The sound of vehicles approaching interrupted them. Through the window, Harper saw Riley's SUV pulling up, followed by a van marked Mountain State Security Systems. A man in his 60s climbed out of the van, carrying a large toolkit. Riley made the introductions. "This is Ryan Pierce. He's a retired Army engineer and locksmith, specialized in vintage military hardware during his service. I explained the situation and he's agreed to help." Ryan examined the canister carefully, turning it over in his weathered hands. His eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Type 7. Classified document container. Standard issue for field operations in the early 1950s. The seal hasn't been tampered with, that's good. It means whatever's inside has been protected from the elements." "Can you open it without damaging the contents?" Harper asked. "That's what I do," Ryan said with a slight smile. "But I need to do this carefully. Riley, you said you're recording everything?" Riley had already set up 2 cameras on tripods, positioning them to capture different angles. "Everything will be documented. Date, time, witnesses present, the whole process." Ryan laid out his tools on Connor's kitchen table, next to the canister. He worked methodically, first examining the locking mechanism under magnification, then carefully applying penetrating oil to the hinges and lock. The room fell silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional crackle from the fireplace. After 20 minutes, Ryan looked up. "I'm ready. This is going to be delicate, so everyone needs to stay back. Connor, as the family member, do you want to be the one to actually open it once I release the lock?" Connor nodded, moving to the table. His hands were steady, but Harper could see the tension in his shoulders. Ryan inserted a specialized tool into the lock mechanism. There was a soft click, then another. "The lock is released. The seal is broken. Go ahead." Connor took a breath and slowly lifted the canister's lid. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper and remarkably well preserved, were several document folders and what appeared to be a leather-bound logbook. He carefully lifted them out and placed them on the table. The top folder was stamped "Top Secret" in faded red ink, with additional markings. "Operation Silent Echo, eyes only. Presidential authorization required." Harper's hands trembled as she photographed the cover before opening it. Inside was a typewritten memorandum dated November 1st, 1953, addressed to Captain Mason Graves from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Riley read aloud as Harper held the document under the camera. "You are hereby ordered to establish Forward Continuity Station 7, FCS 7, in the Echo Ridge sector as per the attached specifications. This facility will serve as a secure communication and command post in the event of nuclear attack on primary government centers. Your unit has been selected for this classified assignment due to your specialized training and security clearances. Construction must be completed by November 15, 1953. Upon completion, your unit will enter sustained operations mode until relieved or until continuity protocols are activated. Sustained operations mode, Connor repeated. What does that mean? Harper pulled out another document, a technical specification sheet with hand-drawn diagrams. It's a bunker. They were building an underground facility designed to house 23 personnel for up to 6 months. Look at this. There's a water source, ventilation system, communication equipment, food storage, even a small infirmary. They were supposed to go underground, Riley said, her voice filled with realization. That's why they disappeared. It wasn't an accident or a desertion. It was the mission. Ryan Pierce leaned in, his expression grave. But 6 months? That would have ended in May 1954. If they went in on November 12th, they should have come out by spring. Connor was already flipping through the logbook. His grandfather's handwriting filled page after page with detailed entries. Listen to this. November 12th, 1953. Entered FCS 7 at 0400 hours. All personnel accounted for. Surface entrance sealed as per protocol. We are now on sustained operations status. May God watch over us and our families. He continued reading, his voice growing more strained. November 20th. Morale remains high despite isolation. Communication checks proceeding as scheduled. Surface surveillance indicates no unusual activity. December 1st. First supply cache accessed. All equipment functioning within normal parameters. The men are adapting well to underground life. Keep going, Harper urged. January 3rd, 1954. Communication with command has ceased. Last successful contact was December 28th. We are operating under contingency protocols. January 15th. Still no communication from command. Tyler Shaw suggests we may have been forgotten. I've ordered continued operations until we receive explicit orders to surface. Connor's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. February 12th. 3 months underground, rations holding, morale declining. Logan Reed experiencing symptoms of claustrophobia. Medical treatment provided. Still no word from command. We maintain our post. They were abandoned, Riley said softly. Someone sent them down there and then just left them. Harper was already pulling out more documents. Look at this. It's a communication log. They were supposed to receive weekly check-ins from command. But according to this, the check-ins stopped after December 28th, less than 2 months into the mission. Ryan examined the technical specifications again. These facilities were designed with the assumption that they'd be actively monitored and supplied. If command lost track of them, or if the program was shut down without proper notification, then they'd be trapped down there following orders waiting for relief that would never come, Connor finished. Harper found another document, a handwritten letter paperclipped to one of the folders. The handwriting was Mason Graves, but messier, more desperate than the logbook entries. March 20th, 1954. This letter is for whoever finds it. We've been underground for 128 days. No communication from command. Rations running low. 2 men sick with respiratory issues. The ventilation system isn't working properly. We've made the decision to surface. If this is a test of our endurance, we have failed. If this is abandonment, then we have been betrayed. Either way, we cannot survive much longer down here. We are soldiers, but we are also human beings. Forgive us. The room fell silent. Outside, a raven called from the pines, its cry echoing across the frozen lake. They came up, Riley said. They had to. The question is, what happened then? Connor was staring at the photograph of Echo Platoon on his wall. And why did they arrange their boots at the cliff edge? That was staged, deliberate. They wanted people to think they'd jumped. Harper's mind was racing through the possibilities. What if they came up, realized they'd been abandoned and decided to disappear for real, start over somewhere with new identities. 23 men? Ryan shook his head. In 1954? With no money, no identification, no resources, that would be nearly impossible, and why would they all agree to it? Unless staying was more dangerous than vanishing, Riley said. She pulled out her phone and began typing. I need to dig into what was happening in the military in early 1954. If Operation Silent Echo was shut down or declassified, there might be records. Connor returned to the logbook, flipping toward the end. There's one more entry, April 2nd, 1954. We surfaced last night. The world above feels alien after months below. We sealed the entrance behind us per protocol, though I doubt anyone will ever look for it. We found evidence that search parties came through, but that was months ago. They think we're dead. Maybe that's for the best. What we know, what we've seen down there, what we've heard in those final transmissions before communications ceased, it's too dangerous. Colonel Briggs will understand why we made this choice. We didn't quit. We just vanished. What did they hear? Harper asked. What transmissions? Riley was scrolling through her phone, her expression growing more serious. I think I know. March 1st, 1954. Castle Bravo nuclear test at Bikini Atoll. It was the largest nuclear device the U.S. ever detonated, and it went wrong. The fallout was 3 times larger than predicted, contaminated an entire island chain, exposed military personnel and civilians to dangerous levels of radiation. A nuclear test gone wrong, Connor said slowly. Echo Platoon was in a continuity bunker, monitoring communications. What if they intercepted classified information about the test, about how badly it went? Harper felt pieces clicking into place. And if the military wanted to keep that information secret, if they needed to control who knew what about their nuclear program, they wouldn't want a unit of soldiers with classified knowledge wandering around asking questions, Ryan finished. Especially if those soldiers had been abandoned for months and had every reason to be angry. Riley stood abruptly. We need to find that bunker. If Operation Silent Echo was real, if FCS-7 exists, there will be more evidence inside. Communication logs, equipment, maybe even information about what happened to the men after they surfaced. The coordinates in my grandfather's journal, Connor said. They don't just mark the surface camp. There are subsurface notations, depth measurements. He was telling someone how to find the entrance. Harper looked at the pile of documents spread across the table. 70 years of secrets, finally coming to light. But she also felt a growing sense of unease. Riley, you said Sentinel Resource Management was surveying Echo Ridge with ground-penetrating radar. That's right. They started 2 weeks ago. What if they're looking for FCS-7? What if someone in the government knows this bunker exists and wants to make sure it stays hidden? The 4 of them exchanged glances, the implications settling over them like a weight. Then we need to get there first, Connor said. Tomorrow morning, we document everything, we recover whatever evidence still exists, and we make sure the truth can't be buried again. It's going to be dangerous, Ryan warned. If that bunker has been sealed for 70 years, the air quality could be toxic. The structure could be unstable. I have cave exploration equipment, Connor said. Air monitors, rope systems, lights. I've been preparing for this possibility for years. Harper nodded slowly. Then we do it. We find FCS-7, we document everything we can, and we finally tell the world what happened to Echo Platoon. As they began planning the expedition, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Somewhere out on Echo Ridge, Sentinel was searching, and whatever they were looking for, Harper was determined to find it first. The pre-dawn darkness was absolute as Harper, Connor, Riley, and Ryan began their ascent into Echo Ridge. They'd started hiking at 4 in the morning, wanting to reach the coordinates before sunrise and before any potential surveillance from Sentinel's operations could spot them. Connor led the way, his headlamp cutting through the darkness as he navigated the steep trail with the confidence of someone who'd spent years exploring these mountains. Harper followed close behind, her backpack heavy with documentation equipment and supplies. Riley came next, her camera gear carefully balanced, and Ryan brought up the rear, carrying the technical equipment they'd need to safely explore the bunker. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and their breath formed visible clouds in the beam of their lights. The forest was silent except for the crunch of their boots on frost-hardened earth and the occasional call of an early-waking bird. "How much further?" Riley asked, her voice hushed despite the isolation. Connor consulted his GPS. "About a mile. The entrance should be in a ravine system on the north face. According to my grandfather's notes, it's concealed inside what looks like a natural cave formation." They climbed for another 40 minutes, the terrain growing increasingly difficult. The sky was just beginning to lighten, a thin gray line on the eastern horizon, when Connor stopped at the edge of a steep ravine. "There," he said, pointing down into the shadows below. Harper followed his gaze and saw it. A dark opening in the rock face, partially obscured by fallen boulders and overgrown vegetation. It looked like dozens of other caves they'd passed, but something about it was different. The rocks around the entrance showed faint signs of tool marks, and the vegetation, while overgrown, grew in patterns that suggested it had once been deliberately arranged. They descended carefully, using ropes that Connor had secured to sturdy pines. The ravine was narrow and dark, the walls pressing in on both sides. At the bottom, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the sound of their movements echoed off the stone. Connor approached the cave entrance and began clearing away branches and debris. Behind the natural overgrowth, Harper could see what looked like a steel door, heavily weathered but still intact. It was painted in camouflage patterns designed to blend with the surrounding rock. "This is it," Connor said, his voice tight with emotion. "This is where they went underground." Ryan moved forward with his equipment, setting up lights that illuminated the entrance in harsh detail. The door had no visible handle or lock from the outside. It was designed to be sealed from within. But at the base, partially hidden by accumulated dirt and rocks, there was a ventilation grate. "The air system," Ryan said, kneeling to examine it. He pulled out a small electronic device and held it near the grate. "Still pulling air from inside. The ventilation system is at least partially functional after 70 years. That's remarkable engineering." "Does that mean we can get inside?" Harper asked. "It means the air inside might be breathable, but we won't know for sure until we breach the seal." Ryan studied the door carefully. "This is going to take some work." The exterior access was designed to be emergency only. They wanted this place hidden and secure. Connor was already unpacking cutting equipment, a portable plasma cutter powered by a small generator. "I came prepared." "Wait," Riley said, setting up her camera to document the entrance. "Before we cut our way in, let's make sure we have everything recorded. The condition of the door, the surrounding area, all of it." For the next 20 minutes, they photographed and documented every detail of the entrance. Harper took measurements, noting how the door was set into reinforced concrete that had been disguised to look like natural rock. The workmanship was impressive. Even knowing what to look for, it would be easy to miss this entrance entirely. Finally, they were ready. Connor fired up the plasma cutter, and the bright blue flame bit into the steel door. The work was slow and difficult, the old metal resistant even after decades of weathering. Sparks flew, and the smell of burning metal filled the ravine. It took nearly an hour to cut through the locking mechanism. When the final piece of metal fell away, Connor and Ryan together pulled the door open. It moved with surprising ease, the hinges still functional despite the years. A rush of stale but remarkably fresh air flowed out from the darkness beyond. Ryan immediately held up his air quality monitor. CO2 levels elevated but not dangerous. Oxygen content is acceptable. We can breathe in there, but let's keep the monitors running. Connor turned on his powerful headlamp and stepped through the doorway. The others followed, their lights revealing a concrete tunnel that descended at a gentle angle into the mountain. The walls were smooth and painted in military gray, with regular intervals marked by stenciled numbers and arrows. "They built this," Harper whispered, her voice echoing slightly. 23 men, in secret, in just a few weeks. This is incredible." The tunnel extended about 50 yards before opening into a larger chamber. As they emerged into the space, their collective lights revealed the full scope of Forward Continuity Station 7. It was larger than Harper had expected. A main room roughly 40 feet square, with several smaller chambers branching off. The space was organized with military precision. Along one wall stood a row of bunks, 23 of them, each with a footlocker at its base. Another wall held communication equipment, radio sets, teletype machines, and what looked like an early computer system. A third area contained shelving stocked with supplies, food containers, water barrels, medical kits, and boxes of equipment. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but remarkably well preserved. The dry mountain air and the sealed environment had kept decay at bay. "It's like a time capsule," Riley said, her camera recording everything. "Frozen in 1954. Connor moved to the bunks, running his hand over the nearest one. A name was stenciled on the footlocker: CPL Logan Reed. He opened it carefully. Inside were personal effects, letters, photographs, a worn Bible, and a leather wallet. Connor pulled out the wallet and opened it. Inside was a photograph of a young woman holding a baby and a Colorado driver's license issued to Logan Reed in 1952. "They left everything behind," Connor said. "When they surfaced, they didn't take their personal effects." "Why?" Harper was examining the communication station. Several logbooks sat on the desk, next to technical manuals and code sheets. She opened the top logbook carefully. "Because they couldn't take anything that would identify them. If they were really disappearing, starting new lives, they had to leave behind everything that connected them to who they were." Ryan had moved to the communication equipment, studying it with professional interest. "This is sophisticated stuff for 1953. Long-range radio capable of reaching command centers across the country, encrypted channels, even what looks like early signal intelligence equipment." He pointed to a large reel-to-reel tape machine. They were recording transmissions. Everything they heard went onto tape. "Are the tapes still here?" Riley asked, moving closer. Ryan opened a cabinet beneath the machine. Inside were dozens of tape reels, each labeled with dates and frequency ranges. He pulled one out. The label read, March 1954, High Priority Military Channels. "This could be it," Connor said. "This could be what they heard, what made them decide to vanish." Harper's historian instincts were screaming at her to proceed carefully, to preserve every detail. "We need to document all of this before we disturb anything. Riley, can you do a complete video walkthrough?" "Already on it," Riley said, methodically filming every corner of the bunker. While Riley worked, Harper moved through the smaller chambers. One was clearly a medical station with examination table, medicine cabinet, and surgical equipment. Another was a food storage area, the shelves still stocked with sealed military rations. A third chamber made her pause. It was set up as a small operations center, with maps covering the walls and a large table in the center. The maps showed the entire Echo Ridge area in extraordinary detail, with markings and notations covering the surface. But what caught Harper's attention was a separate map of the United States, with various locations marked in red. She recognized some of them: Washington, D.C., Colorado Springs, Mount Weather in Virginia. Others were less obvious, remote locations in the Midwest and Southwest. "These are all continuity sites," she called to the others. "FCS 7 wasn't alone. There was a whole network of these bunkers being built in the early 1950s. Connor joined her, studying the map. "My grandfather knew about all of them. Echo Platoon wasn't just building a bunker, they were part of a larger program. If they disappeared, if they knew something that made them dangerous..." Then the government couldn't risk them exposing the entire network, Harper finished. Ryan had managed to power up the old radio equipment using a portable battery pack they'd brought. The tubes warmed slowly, glowing orange in the dim bunker. If I can get the tape machine working, we might be able to hear what they heard. It took 20 minutes of careful work, but Ryan finally managed to thread one of the tapes onto the machine and get it spinning. The sound quality was poor, scratchy, and faint, but voices emerged from the decades of silence. Castle Bravo detonation exceeds predicted yield by factor of 3. Massive fallout contamination spreading beyond projected zone. Personnel exposure levels critical. Repeat. Personnel exposure levels critical. Requesting immediate evacuation protocols. The voice was tense, professional but clearly stressed. Another voice responded, this one harder to hear. Negative on evacuation. Maintain position. This incident is now classified above top secret. All personnel involved are hereby restricted from any external communication. Presidential order. Acknowledge. There was a long pause, then. Acknowledged. But, sir, the exposure levels are being handled. Your concern is operational security. Castle Bravo did not malfunction. The test proceeded as planned. That is the official record. Anyone who suggests otherwise will face court-martial for breaching national security. Is that clear? Yes, sir. The tape continued with more conversations, each one revealing the depth of the cover-up surrounding the Castle Bravo nuclear test. Sailors had been exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. Island populations had been contaminated. The military had known within hours that the test had gone catastrophically wrong, but the official story was being carefully crafted to minimize the disaster. They heard all of this, Connor said quietly. They knew the government was lying about a nuclear accident that had exposed hundreds of people to radiation, and they knew that anyone who contradicted the official story would be silenced. Harper felt sick. So when they surfaced in April, after months of abandonment, knowing what they knew, they realized they were loose ends, Riley said. Trained soldiers who'd been left underground to die, who'd intercepted classified communications about a nuclear disaster cover-up. The military couldn't let them just walk away. Ryan had moved to another section of the bunker and called out sharply, "You need to see this!" They found him in what appeared to be a small armory. The weapons that should have been there were gone, but what remained was more interesting. A locked safe built into the wall. The door was ajar, and inside were more documents. Connor pulled them out carefully. They were travel documents, passports, birth certificates, driver's licenses. But the names were unfamiliar, and the photographs, while old and faded, showed men who might have been members of Echo Platoon, but with different appearances, different haircuts, different clothes, different identities. Exit papers, Harper said, recognizing the collection for what it was. Someone helped them disappear. Someone gave them new identities. One document in particular caught her eye. A handwritten note on military letterhead, signed by Colonel Hunter Briggs. To the men of Echo Platoon, what you've heard cannot be unheard. What you know cannot be unknown. The operation you were sent to complete was real, but the circumstances have changed. Your government has failed you, left you to die, and now sees you as a threat. I cannot undo that failure, but I can offer you a choice. Take these documents, start new lives, disappear so completely that no one will ever find you. It's the only way to keep you safe and keep your families safe. The truth about Castle Bravo will come out eventually, but not yet, and not from you. Consider this my final order as your commanding officer. Survive. Signed, Colonel Hunter Briggs. He helped them, Connor said, his voice breaking. Briggs knew what would happen to them if they tried to return to normal life, so he gave them a way out. And then he retired and moved to Argentina, Riley added. Put himself beyond reach of any investigation or retaliation. Harper sat down on one of the bunks, her mind reeling. 70 years of mystery, finally solved. But the answer was more complex and more tragic than she'd imagined. They didn't die, she said. They didn't desert. They were abandoned, endangered by what they knew, and forced to give up their entire lives, their names, their families, their identities, to survive. 23 men, Connor said, looking around the bunker. 23 soldiers who served their country and were betrayed by it. My grandfather lived somewhere, under a different name, and never got to see his family again. Never got to watch his son grow up. Never got to meet me. But he survived, Harper said gently. Because of Briggs's help, they all survived. They got to have lives, even if those lives were different from the ones they'd planned. Ryan was still examining the documents. Some of these identities were Canadian, some were Mexican. They split up, scattered across North America. That was smart, made them harder to track. Riley had been quiet, her camera still recording. Now she spoke up. We need to tell this story. These men deserve to be remembered for what they sacrificed. But carefully, Harper cautioned. If there are still survivors, if any of Echo Platoon is still alive somewhere under assumed names, we could put them at risk. Connor looked at the photograph of Echo Platoon on his phone, the image he'd carried with him throughout the investigation. They'd be in their 90s now. Most are probably gone, but you're right. We need to be careful. What about Sentinel? Riley asked. They're still searching Echo Ridge. What are they looking for? Ryan picked up one of the tape reels. Maybe this. Maybe they're trying to find and destroy evidence of the Castle Bravo cover-up before it becomes public. Or, Harper said slowly, they're looking for something else. Look at this bunker. It's intact, functional, equipped. If the government wanted to restart continuity operations, if they wanted to update old Cold War facilities for modern use, FCS-7 would be perfect, Connor finished. Remote, hidden, already built and equipped. A sound from outside the bunker made them all freeze. Voices, distant but approaching. Then the unmistakable sound of heavy equipment moving through the forest. Connor moved quickly to the entrance tunnel, peering out carefully. He pulled back immediately, his face grim. Sentinel, at least a dozen people, with excavation equipment. They found us. How? Riley whispered. Doesn't matter now, Ryan said. We need to secure this evidence and get out of here. Harper looked around the bunker, at 70 years of secrets finally revealed. We can't let them destroy this. We need to document everything we can in the next 5 minutes and then leave, Connor said firmly. Riley, copy those tapes to digital. Harper, photograph everything in that operations room. Ryan, help me gather the documents. They worked frantically, their movements quick but careful. Harper's camera clicked rapidly, capturing the maps, the equipment, the personal effects. Riley connected a digital recorder to the tape machine, transferring the crucial Castle Bravo communications. Connor and Ryan stuffed documents into waterproof bags. The voices outside were getting closer. Through the entrance, they could hear someone giving orders. Ground-penetrating radar shows the structure is about 50 meters in. Move the equipment up carefully. We don't want to destabilize anything until we know what we're dealing with. They don't know we're in here, Connor whispered. If we can get out through the ventilation system... The vent shafts are too narrow, Ryan said, having already examined them. We're going to have to go out the front. And run right into Sentinel? Riley asked. Connor pulled out his phone, checking for signal. Nothing. They were too deep in the mountain. We need to split up. Create a diversion. Harper, you and Ryan take the documents and the data. Head south through the ravine system. Riley and I will go north. Lead them away. That's too dangerous, Harper protested. It's the only way, Connor said. This evidence is more important than any of us. It's the truth about Echo Platoon, about what the government did. It has to get out. Before Harper could argue further, the sound of equipment stopped. A new voice called out, echoing through the ravine. To whoever is inside Forward Continuity Station 7, this is Director Morgan Shaw of Sentinel Resource Management. We know you're in there. We're not here to harm you. We just want to talk about what you've found." The four of them exchanged glances. The voice was professional, calm, but there was an undertone of authority that suggested this wasn't a request. "We need to make a decision," Riley said. "Now." Connor held up his hand, signaling for silence. Through the entrance tunnel, they could hear footsteps. Multiple people, moving with tactical precision. Whoever these Sentinel operatives were, they weren't just corporate contractors. They moved like military personnel. "We can't outrun them with all this equipment," Ryan whispered. "And if we try to slip past, they'll catch us in the ravine." Harper's mind raced through their options. They could hide deeper in the bunker, but they'd be trapped. They could try to negotiate. But what leverage did they have? Or, "We broadcast it," Harper said suddenly. "Right now. We go live with what we've found." Riley's eyes widened. "I don't have signal down here." "But we will if we get closer to the entrance," Harper said. "The door's open now. We set up your camera, start streaming everything we've documented, and by the time they reach us, it's already out there." "They can't suppress what thousands of people have already seen." "That's actually brilliant," Connor said. "Once it's public, there's no reason for them to silence us." "Except revenge," Ryan pointed out. "Then we'll deal with that," Harper said firmly. "But at least the truth will be out." They moved quickly. Riley positioned her camera on a tripod near the entrance to the main chamber, angling it to show the bunker's interior while also capturing their faces. She pulled out a satellite uplink device, expensive equipment she'd brought for her documentary work, and began setting it up. "I need 2 minutes for the signal to lock," she said, her fingers flying over the controls. Connor positioned himself next to Harper, the documents and photographs spread out on the table behind them. Ryan stood to the side, ready to display the evidence as they discussed it. 30 seconds, Riley said. The footsteps were getting closer. Voices echoed down the tunnel. "Approach carefully. Unknown number of civilians inside. Rules of engagement. Contain and assess." "We're live in 3, 2, 1. A red light appeared on Riley's camera. Harper took a breath and began speaking, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "My name is Dr. Harper Lane, field historian with the National Archives. I'm speaking to you from Forward Continuity Station 7, a classified military bunker in the Colorado Rocky Mountains known as Echo Ridge. With me are Connor Blake, grandson of Captain Mason Graves, Riley Quinn, investigative journalist, and Ryan Pierce, retired Army engineer. We are here to tell you the truth about what happened to Echo Platoon. 23 men who disappeared in November 1953 and were presumed dead for 70 years. She held up Captain Graves's journal for the camera. "This journal, along with classified documents we've recovered from this bunker, proves that Echo Platoon didn't die in a training accident. They were assigned to build this secret facility as part of a Cold War continuity of government program. They were sent underground in November 1953 and were supposed to remain here in isolation until relieved by command." Connor took over, his voice thick with emotion. "But command abandoned them. Communication ceased after less than 2 months. For 4 months, these 23 men lived in this bunker, following their orders, waiting for relief that never came. When they finally surfaced in April 1954, they discovered they'd been declared dead and forgotten. The sound of boots in the tunnel had stopped. Whoever was approaching was listening." Harper continued. "But that's not why they disappeared. They vanished because of what they heard while monitoring communications from this bunker. In March 1954, the United States conducted a nuclear test called Castle Bravo at Bikini Atoll. The test went catastrophically wrong. The blast was 3 times larger than predicted, and hundreds of military personnel and civilian populations were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation." Riley stepped forward, showing the tape reels to the camera. "Echo Platoon intercepted classified military communications about the Castle Bravo disaster. They heard government officials ordering a cover-up. threatening court-martial for anyone who revealed the truth about the extent of the accident. These tapes document those conversations. When Echo Platoon surfaced, Connor said, they realized they'd become a liability. They knew secrets the government wanted buried. They'd been abandoned and left to die, and now they possessed information that could embarrass the military and the government at the highest levels. Harper held up Colonel Briggs's letter. Their commanding officer, Colonel Hunter Briggs, understood the danger they were in. He provided them with false identification documents and helped all 23 men disappear. They scattered across North America under assumed names, giving up their families, their identities, their entire lives to survive. This bunker contains evidence of everything, Riley said, panning the camera across the interior. The equipment, the personal effects, the communication logs, the classified documents, all of it has been preserved here for 70 years, waiting to be found. A figure appeared at the entrance to the main chamber. A woman in her mid-40s, wearing tactical gear but with her weapon holstered. She held up her hands in a peaceful gesture. "Dr. Lane," she said calmly, "I'm Director Morgan Shaw. I think we need to talk." Riley kept the camera running. Connor positioned himself protectively in front of the others. "You're streaming this," Morgan observed, not as a question. "Smart. How many viewers?" Riley glanced at her monitor. 3,000 and climbing. We've been live for 4 minutes. Morgan nodded slowly. "Then I suppose there's no point in trying to contain this." She stepped fully into the chamber, followed by 2 other operatives who also kept their weapons holstered. "For what it's worth, Dr. Lane, we weren't here to suppress your discovery. We were here to recover it." "Recover it for who?" Connor demanded. "For the same reason you're here. To find the truth." Morgan moved to one of the bunks, running her hand over the footlocker. "My grandfather was Sergeant Tyler Shaw, Echo Platoon. I've spent my career in military intelligence trying to find out what happened to him." The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Harper stared at the woman, seeing the resemblance now, the same strong jawline, the same intense eyes that looked out from the photograph of Tyler Shaw. "You're Tyler Shaw's granddaughter?" Connor said slowly. "I am, and I'm not the only descendant who's been searching. 3 others in my team have connections to Echo Platoon. We formed Sentinels specifically to find FCS-7, to recover the evidence, and to finally tell the truth about what happened to our grandfathers." Riley adjusted her camera to include Morgan in the frame. The viewer count was climbing, over 10,000 now. "Why all the secrecy?" Harper asked. "Why not work through official channels?" Morgan's expression hardened. "Because there are people in the government who still want this buried. The Castle Bravo cover-up went all the way to the White House. Documents were destroyed, witnesses silenced, careers ruined. Even now, 70 years later, there are classified files related to continuity operations that remain sealed. If we'd gone through official channels, this bunker would have been accidentally destroyed before we ever got here." "But you found it anyway," Ryan said. "We've been searching for 3 years, using every resource we had, following every lead. When Dr. Lane's permit application came through the Forest Service, we knew someone else was close. We had to move fast." Morgan looked directly at the camera. "But I'm glad you beat us here. I'm glad you're streaming this, because now it's out there and no one can suppress it." Harper studied Morgan carefully, trying to determine if this was genuine or an elaborate deception. "What happens now?" "Now?" Morgan gestured to the bunker around them. "Now we document everything properly. We recover every piece of evidence. We track down any surviving members of Echo Platoon or their families. And we make sure the story is told completely and accurately." "And the government?" Connor asked. "Will have to face the truth. That 70 years ago, they abandoned 23 loyal soldiers, endangered them for political reasons, and forced them to give up everything to survive." Morgan's voice was fierce. "My grandfather lived under an assumed name in Manitoba until he died in 1998. He never got to see his children grow up, never got to be Tyler Shaw again. The same is true for the others, the ones we've been able to trace. They survived, but at a terrible cost. Riley checked her monitor. 50,000 viewers now. This is going viral. Harper felt the weight of the moment settling over her. They'd set out to solve a historical mystery, and instead, they'd uncovered a story of betrayal, survival, and sacrifice that resonated far beyond the specific facts of what had happened to Echo Platoon. "There's something else," Morgan said, pulling out a folder. "Something we discovered in our research that you need to know. 2 members of Echo Platoon are still alive." The words hung in the air. Harper felt her heart race. "Who?" Connor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have their current names. They've been very careful over the years. But we know from medical records cross-referenced with dental records that 2 men in their 90s, currently living under assumed identities in Canada, match members of Echo Platoon. We've been watching them from a distance, making sure they're safe, but we haven't approached them. We didn't want to risk their security until we had all the evidence secured." "They're alive," Connor said wonderingly. "After all this time, some of them made it." Morgan nodded. "They're the last living witnesses to what happened here. And now that this story is public, now that they don't need to hide anymore, maybe they'll finally be willing to tell their own stories." Riley was monitoring the stream's chat, where thousands of comments were pouring in. "People want to know, will there be an investigation? Will anyone be held accountable?" "Everyone directly responsible is long dead," Morgan said. "But there can be accountability for the institutional failure, for the systems that allowed this to happen. There can be official recognition of what these men sacrificed. There can be proper military honors, restored identities, acknowledgement." Harper thought about the boots arranged at the cliff edge, the symbolic gesture that had haunted military historians for decades. They wanted to be remembered. That's why they left that sign, not as a suicide, but as a memorial. 23 pairs of boots for 23 men who couldn't be buried because they weren't really dead. "And now, they will be remembered," Connor said. "Not as deserters or casualties, but as soldiers who survived impossible circumstances and had to make an unbearable choice." The stream had reached over 100,000 viewers. News organizations were already picking up the story. In a few hours, it would be international news. Morgan pulled out her phone and made a call. "It's done. The evidence is public. Initiate Protocol 7, full documentation and recovery, everything by the book, complete transparency." She listened for a moment, then smiled slightly. "Yes, I know we're probably all going to be investigated. I don't care. This was more important." She ended the call and looked at the group. "My team is standing down. This site is now in your hands, Dr. Lane, as the historical expert. We'll provide whatever support and resources you need, but the story belongs to you and to the families of Echo Platoon." Harper felt tears sting her eyes. She looked around the bunker, at the evidence of 23 lives interrupted, at the sacrifice and survival preserved in this hidden chamber. "We should do one more thing," she said, "before we leave here." She moved to the wall where someone, probably Captain Graves, had carved the names of all 23 platoon members. She pulled out her notebook and read them aloud, slowly and clearly, speaking each name into the camera so that the world could hear. "Captain Mason Graves, Corporal Logan Reed, Sergeant Tyler Shaw, Private First Class Ethan Ward, Sergeant Hunter Briggs, Corporal Cole Bennett, Private Ryan Pierce, Specialist Jordan Cross." She continued through all 23 names, giving each one its due. Connor stood beside her, and when she finished, he added, "These men served their country with honor. They built this bunker, survived impossible circumstances, and made sacrifices no soldier should have to make. They didn't quit. They adapted, survived, and protected each other to the end. That's what soldiers do. That's what heroes do." Riley kept the camera running for another hour as they carefully documented the entire bunker, showing every detail to the watching world. By the time they finally emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, the story had been picked up by every major news outlet in the country. 3 weeks later, Harper stood in Washington, D.C., in a small conference room at the National Archives. Spread across the table were all the documents recovered from FCS-7, now properly preserved and cataloged. Sitting across from her were Connor Blake and Riley Quinn, along with two other people who had specifically requested this meeting. The two men were in their 90s, their faces lined with age, but their eyes still sharp. One introduced himself as James Morrison, the other called himself Robert Chen. But Harper knew from the military dental records that Morgan Shaw had shared who they really were. "Corporal Logan Reed," she said gently, "and Private Cole Bennett." The two men exchanged glances, then the one calling himself James Morrison nodded slowly. "We haven't used those names in 70 years. Honestly thought we'd take them to our graves." "Your secret would have been safe with us," Connor said. "We didn't have to request this meeting." "We know," the man who'd been Cole Bennett said. "But when we saw the broadcast, when we saw that someone finally understood what happened, what we went through, we decided it was time. We're old men. We're tired of hiding." For the next 3 hours, Logan Reed and Cole Bennett told their story. They described the isolation of the bunker, the growing desperation as communication from command ceased, the decision to surface, and the terrifying realization of what they knew and the danger they faced. "Colonel Briggs saved our lives," Reed said. "He risked everything to help us. When we surfaced, he was waiting. He'd figured out what had happened, understood what we'd heard in those transmissions. He had the documents ready, had a plan to scatter us across North America. Some of us went to Canada, others to Mexico, a few even made it to South America." "What about Captain Graves?" Connor asked, his voice breaking slightly. "My grandfather. Where did he go?" Reed looked at him with sympathy. "Mason went to Saskatchewan. He became a school teacher, lived under the name William Carter. He married, had a family, different from the one he'd left behind, but a family nonetheless. He died in 1987. He was a good man, Connor. He never forgot who he really was, but he made the best of the life he was given." Connor pulled out the journal that had started everything. "He left this for someone to find. He wanted the truth to come out eventually." "We all did," Bennett said. "That's why we didn't destroy the bunker or the evidence. We sealed it up, left it preserved, hoping that someday, when enough time had passed, someone would find it and tell our story. And now the story is told," Harper said. "The question is, what happens next?" Reed smiled tiredly. "Now we get to be ourselves again, even if it's only for a little while. Now the other families, the children and grandchildren of Echo Platoon, they get to know the truth. They get to know their fathers and grandfathers weren't cowards or casualties. They were survivors." Riley had been recording the conversation with their permission. "Can I ask, was it worth it? All those years of hiding, giving up your identities?" The two old soldiers were quiet for a long moment. Finally, Bennett spoke. "We survived. We got to live full lives, even if those lives were different from what we'd planned. We got to see the world change, see America grow and evolve. We got to have families, careers, friends, all under different names, but still real. So yes, it was worth it, because the alternative was being silenced permanently and taking the truth about Castle Bravo and Operation Silent Echo to early graves." "The truth always comes out eventually," Reed added. "Maybe not on the timeline we want, but it comes out. That's what we were counting on. That's why we preserved everything." Harper thought about all the pieces of the puzzle that had finally come together. The journal, the bunker, the documents, the tapes, and now the testimony of actual survivors. It was the most complete historical discovery she'd ever been part of. "There's going to be an official ceremony," Connor said. "The Army is going to posthumously award proper honors to Echo Platoon. Acknowledge what you went through, what you sacrificed. Will you attend?" Reed and Bennett looked at each other, then nodded. "Under our real names," Reed said. "One last time, we'll stand as Logan Reed and Cole Bennett. We'll stand for the 21 brothers who didn't make it long enough to see this day." 3 months later, on a cold February morning, a ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery. 23 memorial headstones were dedicated in honor of Echo Platoon, each bearing the real name of the soldier it commemorated. 2 old men in their 90s, wearing the uniforms they hadn't worn in 70 years, stood at attention as a military honor guard presented flags and the Secretary of Defense formally apologized for the abandonment and betrayal these soldiers had endured. Harper stood with Connor, Riley, and Morgan Shaw, watching as history was finally, properly recorded. The ceremony was broadcast live, watched by millions. The story of Echo Platoon had captured the world's imagination, a tale of survival, sacrifice, and the long road to truth. Later, at the reception, Logan Reed pulled Harper aside. He pressed something into her hand, a small, worn compass. "This belonged to Mason Graves," he said. "He carried it through the war, through the bunker, through all the years afterward. When he died, his wife sent it to me. She knew who I really was, one of the few people who did. I've kept it all these years. But I think it should go to Connor now. It should stay in the family." Harper looked down at the compass, its brass casing worn smooth from decades of handling. The inscription inside the lid read, "True North never changes. MG." She found Connor and placed it in his hands, explaining its history. He opened it, read the inscription, and couldn't stop the tears that came. "He never stopped being who he was," Connor said. "Even with a different name, a different life, he never lost his way." "None of them did," Harper said. "That's the real story of Echo Platoon. Not that they disappeared, but that they survived. Not that they ran away, but that they adapted and overcame. They were soldiers until the end." As the sun set over Arlington, casting long shadows across the memorial stones, Harper thought about all the stories that remained hidden in archives and bunkers and sealed records across the country. How many other untold tales of sacrifice and survival were waiting to be discovered? But tonight, this story had been told. 23 men who'd vanished into legend were finally properly remembered. The mystery of Echo Ridge had been solved, and the truth, as it always did eventually, had emerged into the light. The lost platoon was lost no more.